Wednesday afternoon. Almost Pesach, almost Pesach. So we're really glad that everybody's here and taking very good care of yourselves and getting ready for what I hope is going to be a very lovely and happy and memorable Passover. I hope everybody's taking very good care. What am I getting here? I'm getting all kinds of emails here. Good. So I thought this afternoon, what we would do, usually we would go right back to Ketuvim, but it's almost Pesach, and my house is halfway between Chumetz and Pesach, which is a terrible place to be. As you can see, the wall behind me is turning into matzah. So I thought we'd do a little Pesach stuff today. I hope that's okay. Let's begin with last week. Someone had a question about something about kitniot. So let me make sure there's any questions before we get started. Anyone have any burning Pesach questions you're dying to ask the rabbi? This is your last chance. It's free. Anybody got anything? All right. So I'll tell you what we'll do today. There are lots of ways of conducting a Seder. But the problem is that there's one section of the Seder which I think gives lots of people trouble. And it's the most important part. It's the Magid. The Magid part of the Seder, which is the section that we tell the story of the Pesach. What the traditional Haggadah does is take a section from Deuteronomy 26, which is the formula that a farmer would say when he brought his first fruits to the temple. It was a custom that the first fruits of the field and the orchard, you put them in a basket and you bring them to the temple and you stand before the priest and you offer this first fruits. Now, it's a remarkable statement because it's a very short 6-verse sort of concentrated telling of the whole story of how we got here. We were slaves in Egypt and God redeemed us and brought us across the desert and brought us here. And what happens is in the Haggadah, that what you do is you take that section and then they use midrash. They bring all these midrashim. And what the midrashim then do is connect it back to verses in other parts of the Bible, mostly in Exodus, to substantiate each of the claims that are made in that section. The problem is that if you don't know what midrash is and how it works and why it matters, it's a very opaque thing to do. It's very strange. Modern people don't talk that way. We don't sort of study history that way. So one of the simplest things that I recommend that families do, is to look directly at the biblical text. And looking directly at the biblical text, you're going to find it's a wonderful story. And it's really not hard to follow. And it's really easy to tell. And it raises all sorts of questions. What you got to do, though, is you've got to remember that you're reading myth. You're reading a story, which is not meant to be the front page of the New York Times, to the extent that the front page of the New York Times is actually a telling of facts. You have to remember that what this story is doing is a teaching. The word Torah means a teaching. It's here to teach us things. So it has all of these interesting sort of features, but it's coded into the texture of the story. And what you do at the table, depending on how old the people are and how sophisticated they are and how much time you want to devote to this, is to find ways to tell the story. All right. If you have little kids at the table, make sock puppets. All right. That's you, Andy. You need to start making sock puppets because your daughter's going to be old enough soon. And once you have a set of Pesach sock puppets, let my people go. No, no, no. You'll never let them go, by the way. You'll use them till your kids are grown. My kids still love the, let my people go. No, no, no. Then the frogs come, and there's all these, it's just fun. That's the fun way. As they get older, you have the opportunity to read a text with some depth. And the text is a familiar story. It's not a surprise. I mean, the ending's not going to be a surprise. We get out of Egypt, right? We make it out. But the sort of the way that the story is told and the structure of the story and the sort of interesting lessons that are coded into the story make for a very interesting reading. So let's take a look. I'm going to apologize if you come on to, I'm going to do a thing tonight at 7. on the secrets of the Seder. We're going to spend a little bit of time doing this, but today I want to speak, we can do a little more time together. So let's take a look together. So I took the Exodus and I divided it like, well, because it's Hollywood, I made a movie script out of it. Okay. Right. So here's how the story begins, right? Joseph died and all his brothers and all that generation, and the Israelites were fertile and numerous. They multiplied and increased very greatly so that the land was filled with them. I want to look at three things in the story today, okay? Number one, I want you to trace who has power. Where does power lie? This is a political text all about power and what power does and how power works and who has power. That's question number one. Question number two, I want you to notice the men and the women, the role of the men in the story and the role of the women in the story, okay? Because you'll see something very surprising and, well, not so surprising, but very interesting. And number three, when we get to the second chapter, I want you to look for one particular word. It's the word for visual perception, to see. In Hebrew, ro'eh, resh, aleph, hey. Those three things, if you follow those three things, I think you end up with some very interesting insights into the telling of this Passover story. So let's go quickly through this part, right? A new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. So the whole question is, what does that mean? To what extent, you know, every new leader who rises up over a place says, I want to do better than the guys who came before me. So there's a sort of discontinuity. He doesn't know Joseph because he doesn't know the backstory. Now listen to what he does. He says to his people, and notice this, he's the ruler. He's the king. He's the most powerful man in the world. And he says to his people, he announces to his people, look, he says, the Israelite people are much too many for us. Let's deal wisely with them. Hebrew is hava nitchak malo. Let's be chacham. Let's be wise about this, so that they may not increase. Otherwise, in the event of war, they'll rise up against us. Who has power? Who has power in the story? Who has power in this story?
Pharaoh.
Well, you would think that Pharaoh would have power, right? That's the way it appears.
The people, because of their side.
So that's the point. You see, you think that Pharaoh's the one with the power. He's the one wearing the crown. He's the one sitting on the throne. He's the one who controls armies and continents. And yet, look at what the first thing we know about him, besides that he doesn't know how we got there, is he says to his people, what? I'm afraid of them. I'm afraid of this population of Jews. Fear. And what happens when a country makes policy out of fear? What does fear do to power? Look what it does. It reduces him. He is supposed to be the son of the God. He is supposed to be the most powerful human on the planet. He is a god in Egypt. And yet he says, there's something in the world more powerful than me. What is it? Jews. And by the way, this is one of the classic anti-Semitic tropes, you know, sort of word themes, that there's something uncanny about this people, something unnatural, that they are at the one side, they're a minority, they're small, they're not very important, but on the other side, they have some strange power. Some strange power. And he confesses to his people his fear. Very interesting sort of statement here. Stanley, you want to add something?
No.
Stan? Okay, good. Good. So let's take a look. What does he do next? So how are you going to reduce their numbers? Right? So there's three attempts, right? Attempt number one is going to be slavery. Attempt number two is going to be limited genocide. And attempt number three is going to be general genocide. So they set taskmasters over them to oppress them and force them with labor and build cities for Pharaoh. So he's afraid of them because he's afraid they have power over him, but he has enough power to make them into slaves. I mean, he has enough power to turn them into slaves, which is a very strange thing, because if he has the power to turn them into slaves, what is he afraid of them for? What could they possibly do to him? But the more they were oppressed, the more they increased. So the Egyptians came to dread them because they don't respond in the way that people are supposed to respond to slavery. You make them slaves, there'll be fewer of them. But somehow the more you enslave them, the more ruthlessly you treat them, the more there are. So he has to resort to plan B. Plan B is limited genocide. So the problem here is Pharaoh against Israelite fertility. And now Pharaoh is going to intervene in something which is a place where pharaohs shouldn't intervene. In one of the most intimate circumstances in all of human experience, the birth of a baby. It's a woman's domain. It's midwives caring for mothers who are birthing babies. Men don't go in there. I mean, I see these movies where guys don't go. I mean, it's only in modernity that men are invited into the delivery room. That's a very modern invention. It's a woman's domain. Because the women in the story, you'll see in a moment, they represent life. They represent the increase of life, the spread of life, the championing of life. It's only the men who represent death. So the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives Shiphrah and Puah. Now look at that sentence for a minute. Anybody see anything strange in that sentence? In the Bible, the greatest compliment you can be paid is they mention your name. The greatest insult is to have your name erased. That's why we have groggers on Purim, because we're trying to erase the name of you-know-who. Now look at that sentence for a minute. The king of Egypt, what's his name? We don't know. Later, we're going to be told what it is. But in this sentence, he doesn't have a name. Shiphrah and Puah, the two midwives who serve the Hebrews, they have names. Those are two Egyptian names, by the way. They have names, which right away tells you something. That the ostensible power, the visible power is not the real power. It's not the real power. And this is all about preserving yourself in the world of time. When you deliver the Hebrew women, he says, look at the birthing stone, or a woman is delivered on a stone. If the baby's a boy, kill him. If it's a girl, let her live. So he's going to the people whose job it is to bring babies into the world, and he wants them to usher babies out of the world. The midwives, fearing God, did not do as the king of Egypt told them. They let the boys live. Why not? Why didn't they do what the king told them? The king's the most powerful guy in the world. Why don't they obey him?
They fear God.
What does that mean? They're not Jewish.
But
It said Hebrew.
They're Hebrew. See, that's good. So the question is, when the phrase is Hamildot Ivriot, I'm going to give you a little grammar lesson.
Thank you.
That can be constructed in two ways. Either adjectively, which means they're midwives who are Hebrews, or it can be constructed construct. They are midwives to the Hebrews. I'm going to insist it's the second one, because I don't think Pharaoh could get anywhere telling Jewish women to kill Jewish babies.
Right.
I don't think anybody could get anywhere doing that, right? But I mean, the only thing we do is kill them slowly with love and expectation and guilt. But in terms of throwing them into denial, it's really hard to get Jewish mothers to do that to babies. However, if they're Egyptians, that makes more sense. They're citizens of his state. They serve him. They serve his crown. And if the crown comes and says, kill the Israelite babies, it's our little conspiracy. I think that they're Egyptians. But if they're Egyptians, Andy, what does it mean that they feared God? I'll give you a little hint. The word for God here is not Adonai, the God of Israel. It's the word Elohim, the God of creation. The God of creation. Where does a midwife learn to be a midwife? Today you go to school. You go to doula school. In those days, where did you learn to be a midwife? Where do you think she learned to be a midwife? What?
From those around her, from...
Who taught her? Her mother.
Right.
Who taught her mother? Her mother did. Who taught her? Her mother did. 10,000 generations of human midwives, right? You take a woman who's the 10,000th generation of midwives, and you say to her, I know that you're practiced in bringing life into the world. I want you to use the same hands you use to bring life into the world to kill. And she says, what? I fear God, meaning It's not the order of the world that I respect. That's not the order of the world that I'm part of. The phrase yirah in Hebrew means fear, but the context, the connotation rather, in all of the Bible is that's conscience. There's a phrase of Yirat Elohim that goes all through the Bible that refers to when we're talking about non-Jews, when they behave with decency, that they're said to have Yirat Elohim. There's a story earlier in the book of Genesis when Abraham is visiting the palace of Avimelech, and he passes off his wife as his sister, and Abimelech almost sleeps with her, and then finds out, he has a dream that it's Abraham's wife, not his sister, and he goes to Abraham, he says, what the hell did you do this for? And Abraham's answer is, I didn't know there was any yirah in this place. I didn't know there was any common morality, common decency, common respect for the natural order in this place. That's what's here. These are not Jewish religious people. These are people who see the world and live in the world and respect life and know what's good and what's bad. There's a common decency that we would talk about. And that's who these midwives are. But now there's a problem. The problem is, if Pharaoh's ready to kill and you just disobeyed his order, what's he going to do to you? Right.
Kill you.
So Pharaoh calls these two women in and he says to them, why did you do this thing, letting the boys live? Now watch what they do. The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They're beasts. Before a midwife can come, they've already given birth. Now, why does that excuse work? Because that's exactly the propaganda that Pharaoh was using to get his people to hate the Israelites. That's exactly what Joseph Goebbels did to us in the 1930s. Jews are not Germans. There were two metaphors, vermin, which means bugs, rodents. And if you have rodents or vermin in your kitchen, what do? You call an exterminator. And he talked about a cancer on the body politic. And if you have a cancer, you cut it out as a surgeon would do. So what happens is they repeat back his propaganda in public, and all he can do is agree with them. He can't disagree with them. He can't disagree with them. And now the Torah tells you one more little thing, which is completely extraneous, except it's precious. Because God rewarded the midwives, and the people multiplied. And because the midwives feared God, God gave them descendants. Now, what does that mean, God gave? Well, why did it tell me that? First of all, why did it tell me the whole story? This was a failed attempt at limited genocide. Why tell me this whole story? First of all, you understand, this is the first time in all of human history that a circumstance of civil disobedience in the name of a higher justice is recorded in history. This is before Martin Luther King and before Gandhi and before any of the great civil rights demonstrations. Here you have two midwives who risk their lives on behalf of a people that are not their own because it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do. And the Torah says God gave them descendants, which means what? What does that mean? That means the world is filled with them. Which tells you what? First of all, if you see an Egyptian on the street, don't make fun of him, because he could be a descendant of Shifra and Puah. But second, what it's telling you is, yes, you have an obligation given by God to be a blessing to the world, to bring morality to the world, but you're not alone. There are allies in every people on the planet that you can go and find, right? You all know Rabbi Schulweis was my teacher. And when he taught the Holocaust, he decided that the only story you could teach without destroying the moral morale of the Jewish people, without just giving up out of cynicism, was to teach the story of Christian rescuers. And as he started discovering Christian rescuers, he discovered thousands of these people. Oskar Schindler, the guy they made the movie about, was only one of them. In every country, not just in Europe, because there was Sempo Sugihara in Japan, in every country where the Nazis invaded and tried to take Jews, there were people who were not Jewish who reached out and protected Jews. The descendants of Shifra and Puah, right? And they gain an immortality in this story because we know their names and we still don't know the name of the king of Egypt. So who has power? One of the rules of power is very interesting. The higher up you are on the hierarchy, the more you depend upon all the other people in the hierarchy in order to get stuff done. And if they want to stop what you're doing, it's not so hard for them to stop it because you're way up there. The king is way up on the top of the hierarchy, and these schlepper ladies are at the bottom, and yet they undo his whole plan because that's the way the world works. You have to get the whole hierarchy to do what you want them to do. And so now Pharaoh realizes that's what he needs to do. So he tells his people now, limited genocide is no longer the way. He tells his people, every boy that is born to you, you throw into the Nile, let every girl live. Which, by the way, is counterintuitive because if you want to destroy a population, kill the women, not the men. Okay, but of course he's not very bright. So that's part of what the story is about. So look at the power dynamic in this story. Look at the power that people have outside of the normal structures of power, right? And it becomes a really interesting question. If you happen to have teenagers at your table or young adults, or even adults, who has power today, right? Who has power? In our culture, who are the most powerful people in our culture? The ostensible answer is the President of the United States. But could you make the case that somebody else has power? Could you make the case that engineers at Apple and Google have more power than the President of the United States to shape life in America right now? Or could you make the case that Black Lives Matter demonstrators have more power? I mean, just think about where power lives in a culture. That's one thing. And the second thing is I want you to notice, because we're about to go into the second story, where the men are and where the women are. The men are on the side of death, and the women are all on the side of life. And what an interesting way to tell a story, right? All right, any questions, comments, counter sermons? It's awfully quiet today. All right, let's take a look. Let's go to the second chapter. Now watch what happens in the second chapter. This is chapter 2. Act 2, scene 1. A certain man of the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. Mazel tov. Why are they telling me that? Well, first of all, notice what happened. When we study history, we study it as the story of, governments and war and great social trends and great technological inventions. But sometimes history takes place in one house, in one heart. The micro of history. So this perspective, if you're looking at a cinematic perspective, shifts from the grand story of the palace to a slave hovel where a man and a woman come together as husband and wife. One family. We're going to focus on one family. It's interesting, by the way, that when we teach the Holocaust, what are the greatest stories of the Holocaust? The greatest book of the Holocaust is not some huge tome describing how Hitler rose to power and destroyed 6 million Jews, 11 million people. It's the biography, the diary of one 13-year-old German-Dutch girl hiding in an attic in Amsterdam. Mm-hmm. Because it's hard to focus on 6 million, 11 million armies and camps and technology. It's a whole lot easier to focus on the breaking heart of a little girl who doesn't have a future. Or Elie Wiesel's book, Night, this 15-year-old boy in the Auschwitz concentration camp.
Exactly.
Thank you. A certain man of the house of Levi married a woman, and they conceived and had a kid. Now, wait a minute. What's going on around them? They're throwing babies into the Nile, right? So what's the biggest act of resistance you can carry out? Have a kid. Have a kid. But you're going to hope the kid's a girl, right? Because it's going to be scary. And when she saw how beautiful he was, she hid him for 3 months, and she could no longer hide him. She got a wicker basket, caulked it with bitumen and pitch, put the kid into it, placed it by the reeds of the Nile, the bank of the Nile, and his sister stationed herself at a distance to learn what would befall of him. Couple quick things. Anyone remember Superman? Remember the
Yeah,
first
of course.
Superman 1, the first episode of Superman, or any of the movies when it tells you the story? What's the story of Superman? Come on.
He falls to earth and
He doesn't fall to earth.
well, he comes to earth and
Yeah, wait. You're going to
Parents put him in a capsule and send him to Earth.
oh right.
He's an orphan.
his father is the visionary who knows that Krypton is falling apart.
Or
Right.
out.
His mother's wearing a very slinky dress, doesn't look like a woman that just gave birth to a baby at all. And the planet starts to break up, remember? And all I have is this tiny rocket ship, which was a model of the one I was building to save the whole planet. Quick, put the baby in it. Does this sound familiar? Yeah. Remember that the two guys who wrote Superman were two Jewish boys from Cleveland getting beat up on their way to school. So they took the story they learned in Hebrew school and put it into outer space. Mama puts the baby into the rocket ship and sends him to Earth because she thinks maybe there he'll have a future. Mama takes the baby and puts him in a basket and sends him down the Nile. The other thing, by the way, is there's a famous Egyptian myth. I think it's the birth of Osiris. Same thing. He's born out of the river. But the more interesting thing I want to show you is this. Look at this. Look at the language. I have to tell you that I've read this like a million times as a kid and as a student and never noticed it. The woman conceived and she bore a son. Okay, so we know the trouble now, right? Right? She's in trouble because they're throwing baby boys into the Nile. When she saw how beautiful he was, she hid him for 3 months. Now, wait a minute. Come on. Like, what? And if he were a miskite, she would have thrown him into the Nile herself? I mean, what does it mean? She saw how beautiful he was, so she hid him. Of course, every Jewish mother, every mother takes a baby and says, oh, look how beautiful, most beautiful baby in the world, right? Every mother says that. That's not what it says. It's not how beautiful he was. The Hebrew is vatere oto. She saw him, ki tov hu. Ki tov does not mean he's Gerber baby box beautiful. What is ki tov? What language is that? That's the language of creation. Vayar Elohim ki tov. God saw that it was good. Ki tov, she saw something in him cosmic. Now she's going to hide him anyway because she loves her baby. But she's hiding him and she knows that there's something extraordinary about her son. And now when she couldn't hide him any longer, this is a great opportunity for a little bibliodrama. What do you mean she couldn't hide him any longer? Well, you could say he's too big, he's making too much noise. Okay, fine. What does it take for a mother to put her baby in a basket and float him down the Nile? What does that take? Think of the mother.
Ask the mothers that are taking their kids and sending them here.
Think of that mother. Think of what you know.
But
Survival.
But the sister is older. Where did she come from? Not to mention his older brother.
Could be a first marriage. Could be a first marriage for daddy, but not for mommy. Okay. Could be that they were married and had a couple kids and then separated when the genocide began and came back together. That's what the Midrash teaches, right? Could be that she's not really a sister, but a cousin. Sometimes we call our cousins our sisters. I mean, there's a lot. You're right. It's a very good question. So keep the question in mind. I like to think of that mother and think of her nightmares. And after a while, she couldn't stand the nightmares anymore, that they would come and take the baby and destroy him. So she says, to hell with us. I'm going to put him in a basket and let life carry him. She's a believer. Maybe God will protect my baby. Right? That's the beginning of the movie Prince of Egypt. Right? That's when you see the baby floating down the Nile with these crocodiles and hippopotamuses. It's quite wonderful. And the sister goes to see what happens. Ready? The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe in the Nile. So the daughter of the guy who promulgated the genocide is bathing in the Nile, right? With her maidens walking along the Nile. So she's surrounded by her security detail and her ladies in waiting, right? She saw the basket among the reeds and sent the slave girl to fetch it. So wait a minute. She's surrounded by all these women, but the only one who saw the basket was Bat Paro, the daughter of Pharaoh. And she goes and she gets the basket. Now, let me ask you something. If you have a basket and in the basket is a baby and you pull him out of the Nile, do you have to open the basket to know what's inside? Answer?
No.
Why?
Hear it.
Because he's screaming, right? Right? But the Torah is about looking. Now watch, so listen to the way the sentence is structured. When she opened it, she saw that it was a child. No, you see, that's the point. She knew it was a child inside. But what did her father want her to see when she opened the basket? What did Pharaoh want her to see when she opened the basket? What did Pharaoh teach his people to see when they saw Israelites?
Girl.
What did Joseph Goebbels teach Germans to see when they saw Jews?
A beast, an animal, not a human.
Not a human.
Right.
Not something related to me. Something expendable that a bug I can step on and not have to worry about it. But here's the miracle. The daughter of Pharaoh opens it up and she sees what?
A baby.
A baby boy crying. And her maternal instincts begin to flow. And she took pity. It's not pity like, oh, I'm pity. Her maternal instincts connect with the kid. And just in case you say, well, she doesn't know that he's a Jewish kid, they say, sure she does. She says, it must be a Hebrew child. How did she know it was a Hebrew child?
The blanket. The blanket had to. Supposedly.
Andy, that's brilliant. That's in the movie. That's in the movie.
Circumcision.
I looked to try to find that in one of the sources because DeMille did consult Midrash. I can't find it. I think that came from Macy's because for the life of me, I don't know what a Jewish blanket looks like. I swear to God. But he says it's a Jewish baby. He's got a Jewish blanket on it.
I want to address that. So when I say a blanket, it could also mean the cloths, the clothing that they were wearing.
Yeah, it could be.
It was patterns, and because I took a class about, I had to take a class on film, and of course they did the Ten Commandments. So
good. I love that
broke
movie.
this down, and they said the pattern they used was supposed to represent a very specific thing that all the slaves had. And they were showing from all the different areas. So if you looked and if you watch, all the slaves were not Jews. They were all from different countries and different places they covered or conquered, and they would have different colors. So when you saw when I see the one from Moses going down this river, the joke is, yes, that's the Mexican version. If you look, it is a actual Mexican blanket. But it's true. The idea was to actually show a representation of this was one of the conquered people that they had. The baby doesn't have the cloth or the garment that they physically carry, but it's the representation of the blanket is to represent the clothing they wore, so they could tell which sect of people they were.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's a great explanation. Thank you. That's wonderful.
That's
It's like in Scotland. In Scotland, there's a different tartan for every clan,
Right,
you know.
right.
Oh, he's a McGregor, you know. How can you tell? Because he's wearing McGregor colors, you know.
But wasn't he circumcised?
Well, now that's the second way you could know. Now, the only people circumcised in Egypt were Jews and priests. Priests of Egypt were circumcised. The question was whether circumcision was practiced in Egypt, because there's this scene in the beginning of the book of Joshua that when they arrive in Eretz Canaan under Joshua, there's this mass circumcision of all the men. So it would occur that the book of Joshua, the author of the book of Joshua, believed that circumcision had stopped being practiced when we were slaves, right? And had to be resumed when we renewed our covenant with God under Joshua. So that's another possibility, though. It's a good possibility. Bert, go ahead.
To follow up on both one of your comments and Andrew, your metaphor about Goebbels, the Jews had distinctive clothing in Germany, symbology,
Right.
the star, or during the Middle Ages.
Right.
So it may also be that the blanket in which this baby was wrapped contained that particular unique identifier.
Right.
So there's lots of possibilities.
Lots of possibilities. You know, if you're really cynical, I mean, you know, but I think it's a nice idea. I mean, these are all different ways. But the point is that she knows this is a forbidden child, and she knows she's not supposed to see him as a child. But her maternal instincts are stronger than her father's decrees, just like with the midwives. Just like with the midwives. So the woman's love of life and respect for life overcomes the male ability to murder, the male destruction of life. That's part of the story here. It's built into the story. So what happens? She takes the baby and she says, I'm going to adopt him, right? And the daughter comes along and says, you want me to go get you a nurse? Remember, this is a few years before baby formula was invented. So she said, yeah, go find me a nurse. So she gets the mother. So the mother gets to nurse the kid. And, you know, you nurse a kid for some years in that world, right? So she's nursing the kid, and then the kid grows up and he goes to Pharaoh's daughter. And now he has two identities. He is Prince of Egypt and son of slaves. And he has two mothers. He has Yocheved, the woman, the Levite woman that birthed him. And he has adopted mother, the daughter of Pharaoh, right? So he's the grandson of the Pharaoh. And I want you to notice that in both cases, both women have extraordinary means of vision, extraordinary eyes. His birth mother says, Ki tovhu, she can see that he is cosmic and has cosmic significance. And his adopted mother feels pity for him and doesn't, and love for him, and doesn't see him as her culture would have us see him. She looks past the propaganda to see that it's a baby. He inherits both of those abilities. And here's the proof, right? Sometime after that, Moses grew up. So this white space right here, this belongs to DreamWorks Studio, because that's the whole movie, Prince of Egypt. None of that's in the Bible. It's all in this white space. Jeffrey Katzenberg leased it, and you can't get anything in there, okay? So he grows up, and here's the sense. When he went out to his people, and the problem is that at that point, we don't know who his people are. Are his people the Egyptians, or his people the Israelites? And that really is the question. Which side are you on, boy? As the old folk song says, right? And he witnessed their suffering. Now, the word is sivlotam, which means their work, their labor, or their suffering. It's a double entendre. So again, if he's standing on the balcony of the palace and he sees thousands of Israelite slaves toiling below him, the question is, does he identify with the slaves, or does he identify with the masters? Does he see the slave as being oppressed and suffering, or does he see the whole scene in front of him as economic progress, as a bigger and better Egypt rising from the sand? What does he see? That's the question. And which side are you on? And now comes the moment of truth. And now he goes down from the palace into the slave yard, into the work yard, and he doesn't see the mass. Now we go from the macro to the micro again. He sees one encounter. He sees Vayar, Ish Mitzri, Makeh, beating Ish Ivri. He sees an Egyptian man, this is literal, an Egyptian man beating a Hebrew man, one of his brothers. Ish Ivri, Makeh, Ish Mitzri, Makeh, Ish Ivri. Now, you could have told that line differently. He could have said he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, or a master beating a slave. But the Torah tells us very clearly, Ish Mitzri, Makeh, Ish Ivri. He sees two human beings engaged in an encounter in which one is beating the life out of the other. What does the average Egyptian see? The average Egyptian sees an Egyptian taskmaster whomping on a slave. What does the average Egyptian see? What does the ordinary Egyptian see? What's there in front of him? What's a slave in the mind of Egypt?
Lower than they are.
Yeah, that's just lower than an animal. A slave is a quantity of work embodied, right? We would call it an appliance. None of you woke up this morning and asked the refrigerator if it had a good night, because not even on your level of being. It's not, you wouldn't think that's what a slave is, socially invisible. Socially invisible. It's just work. That's all it is. It's just a quantity of work. So a guy beating a slave is the functional equivalent. We used to have a television set that had bad vertical hold, and the only way to get channel 11 was to whack it at a certain spot. That's what it's the equivalent of. Changing a tire by the side of the road. That's all it is. No, but nothing. Normal, simple, don't see a damn thing. What does Moses see? What's the difference between what Moses sees and the average Egyptian sees? What does Moses see? Ish Mitzri, Makeh Ish Ivri. Ish. What does Ish mean? It means person. What does he see? He sees two human beings engaged in a transaction in which one is murdering the other. And suddenly he wakes up and he sees what this is all about. This isn't about taskmasters and slaves. This isn't about Egyptians and Hebrews. This is about human beings who share a world dealing with each other in certain patterns, in certain ways. He sees beyond the culture. He sees beyond what we're supposed to see. Of kids who see homeless people on the street and don't recognize them as human. They just become part of the urban landscape, like trees and trash cans and stoplights, and aren't human. They don't see those people as human beings who are sleeping outside and have no protection from the cold and the rain. Because we're so used to seeing homeless people and we overlook them. They're invisible to us now. Moses is that strange and weird human being who sees what nobody else can see. Go ahead, Andy, please.
What I find interesting is why the epiphany happens now. Obviously, he's grown through the palace. And we have no stories of Moses from the time that he literally is accepted from the daughter until this moment. And I find it interesting, and I would really love to. I've heard or I've listened to sermons and kind of like possibilities of how Moses could have experienced things, but it's this moment is when things change. He was finally at a point in his life where he could see the difference of the two.
Because the Torah isn't interested in all the other aspects of his life. Whether he played chess or ice hockey, and whether he, listened to rock music or classical music. The Torah is interested in only one thing. How does this man become the great moral leader of the Jewish people? And so this is his moral awakening. And that's the only story that matters. Hello? All the other stuff is interesting, but not interesting. I want to know how Winston Churchill got to be Winston Churchill. Why he smokes cigars and drinks scotch, I don't care. Where did he find the moral strength to be Winston Churchill? Right? I want to know that. I want to know where Socrates gets to be Socrates. I want to know where Moses gets to be Moses. So this is the story of how he wakes up morally. And he decides this is how he's going to see the world. Yeah, Stan, please.
I always wondered, how is it that the Pharaoh or anybody else in the palace didn't question, where did this child come from?
Good question. What do you suppose your answer is? Come on, use your imagination. First of all, Pharaoh's got 100 wives and 500 children and 2,000 grandchildren. Like the Saudi royal house. You know how many grandchildren there are in the Saudi royal house? Right? That's number one. Number two, so he doesn't keep track. He doesn't keep track. Number two, women getting pregnant and giving birth is not men's stuff. A woman in that world, look, even in the world I grew up, you grew up in. Remember when we were kids, I had a 4th grade teacher who got pregnant. And one day she came to school and she said, kids, I have to leave for the next little while. I'm going to have a baby. And we all went, yay, Mrs. So-and-so. And because there was a custom in schools that a pregnant woman couldn't teach kids. And it was early in her pregnancy. It wasn't like in the 9th month. It was like before she was even showing. This is just women who were pregnant were sort of shut away, So, he doesn't know if she's pregnant or not. So that's another reason why, right?
Okay.
Now, why the kid doesn't look like her. You could ask a lot of great questions. It's a wonderful question. Stan Schroeder.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that we were telling a story, which we are, and all stories are about individual people. They're not about groups of people per se, because you can't tell that kind of a story.
Yeah.
So, we have individual midwives, we have individual mothers and so forth, and we're telling a story.
Yeah. But the story then, you see, but yeah,
awakening.
right. But the story then asks us a big question about our eyes. What do we see when we walk the world? It's always a question of what we are. It's a myth. It's a story about us. All right, one more line, then we're going to call it a day. Ready? So what does he do? He looks this way and that way, and seeing nobody, he struck down the Egyptian and hit him in the sand. When he looks this way and that way, what is he looking for? Why does he turn this way and that way to look?
Witnesses. Is anybody going to see what he's going to do?
Could. I thought so too. I think you're right. I think that's partially what it is. Of course, he's a prince of Egypt. This is just a lowly taskmaster. Who's going to care? Right? Who's going to care?
I thought it was other taskmasters or guards.
Could be taskmasters. Let me suggest something else. Right? Tell you a quick story. I used to live in New York City. I lived in New York City when it took guts to live in New York City during the Dinkins administration, right? I lived on 121st Street and Broadway, and I wanted to go downtown to work. I had to take the subway at 116th Street. So every morning I'd put on my coat and my boots and I'd go walk down to the 116th Street subway station. One winter morning as I'm walking down there, every corner had its beggar, because Ronald Reagan had opened the insane asylums, and everybody, there were crazy people everywhere, right? All of the mental health, the people who were mentally ill were living on the street. So there's this crazy guy on every street corner, and I give each guy a quarter, and I get down to, I don't forget, 118th Street or so, and the 118th Street beggar is there, and he turns to me and says, "Hey man, can you have a quarter for a cup of coffee?" And just as he's asking me for a quarter for a cup of coffee, his eyes roll up in his head and he keels over. So I'm like shocked, like this guy just died in front of me. So I jump down on the floor and start giving the guy artificial respiration and compressions on his chest. Meanwhile, the subway arrives and all these people come out of the subway stop. And guess what they're doing, these New Yorkers? Go ahead. Guess what they're doing as they see me trying to save this guy's life? Guess what they do?
Walking around you.
They step over me. They walk around me. They ask me, what am I, out of my mind? And then a cop car comes and the cops get out and they say, "What are you doing?" And I say, "Well, I'm making love to this man. I'm trying to save this guy's life." And they say, "Oh, don't worry." And they call for a bus, and the ambulance comes and they pull the guy up. I saved the guy saved the guy's life. I mean, the next day, the guy's back on the 118th Street. Moses sees a guy getting beaten to death. And suddenly it occurs to him, nobody's noticing. Nobody's stopping. Nobody's doing anything. Why am I the only one doing anything? Think of it that way. It's not that he's afraid he's going to get caught. He can't believe he's the only one who sees this, but nobody sees this, because the story is all about what you see and what you're trained to see. And that's what the story is about at this point. And then we go a little farther into the story and it says, God is going to meet him at the burning bush. And what's God going to say to him? "I can see my people suffering. I can see them, and it's time for me to save them." This is about, so I want to suggest three things as you're thinking about this story and teaching it. I really think this makes a better Magid than what's in the Haggadah. I think all you got to do is download it from a simple Bible, a good Bible translation. I took it from the JPS. I doctored it a little bit. And just read this with the people at your table and just ask them these questions as you go through. Look for the power dynamics. That's number one. Look for the male-female dynamic. That's number two. And look for this word "see" and ask, what is this teaching us about social visibility and invisibility, social perception, ethical, moral perception? I think it's a wonderful story. I think it's a remarkable story. So let's stop here. Any last questions, comments, or counter sermons? Yes, San, please.
I just want to tell you, that we're in a restaurant, a small restaurant in San Francisco, and this woman passed out. Norm went to her immediately. She was like down, and he's telling, but she's awake, but she's not moving. And he's telling her, and they call somebody, and the restaurant guy comes over and said, "Can we move her outside?" He doesn't want, can we take her outside so that, she can lay in the street? And Norm said, "No, we cannot move her." But exactly that.
There are lots of stories like this. My friends, I have two very, very sweet friends. They're members of the shul. They were on an airplane. They're on American Airlines flight. The stewardess says they're a doctor on the flight. They're both doctors, so they got up to go there, but neither one of them is a cardiologist or an emergency doctor. They get up, and there's a person lying on the floor of the plane, and they're giving him they have an oxygen thing on him, and the person's having a very serious heart attack. So my two friends start working on the guy. And two friends, and there was another guy who was an optometrist. So they're working on the guy, and they're giving him, and the stewardess keeps asking the same thing. "Could you move him? Because I have to get the cart up the aisle with the beverages," right? And they're doing this, and they're like, and everyone else on the plane is like looking at him, asking him to be a little quieter. I'm watching the movie. I mean, this kind of like crazy stuff. So then finally the plane lands, and they take the guy in an ambulance, right? And the people, the ground crew thanks my friends. And I said, what did American Airlines do for you? They said, they sent us a nice note. They sent him a bottle of wine. I said, they should give you like 1 trillion miles I mean, you saved the guy's life on their plane. They got a nice note from the guy, actually. He survived. He's okay. He sent a really beautiful note with a picture of his family saying, you made this possible, which made them feel really good. But people react in really weird ways. They don't want to see it. They don't want to see emergencies. It's strange. Anyway, listen, we're not going to have a session next week. We're going to take the week off. It's Chol Hamoed Pesach, and I want to spend some time with my family. So we will continue on April 7th, okay, which is the first Wednesday, and we'll go back to learning the books of the Bible. I want to wish every one of you a happy, healthy, sweet, kosher Pesach. Take good care. Tonight, 7 o'clock, I'm going to do another session on Pesach preparation. We'll do a little of this and some other stuff, some other texts. Tomorrow morning is the Siyum. If you're a firstborn, come online at 7:30. We're going to daven, and then I'm going to teach a little bit so you can eat during the day. Of course, you do your hunt for chametz on Thursday night, and you burn it Friday morning. And then Friday night is Shabbos, but it's not Pesach, so you use egg matzah at your Seder, at your Shabbos table. You won't find a challah, there ain't any, and you don't want to use it anyway. You don't want to get chametz in your house. So you want to use egg matzah for your Shabbos table. And then the Seder begins on Saturday night. We're doing 2 Zoom Seders. At 5 o'clock, a beautiful program for little kids. Puppets, music, it's just adorable. It's just adorable. It's like the Seder I wanted to be at when I was a kid. At 6 o'clock, I'm going to lead a Seder with the Cantors. We're going to do about a 45-minute Seder just to go through the Seder. I'll just take your computer, put it on a pillow at the head of the table. We'll do it together. And then all during Yontif, Sunday and Monday, we have davening. And all week, it's Chol Hamoed Pesach. So a happy, sweet, healthy Pesach to everybody. Take care.
Thank you so much.